you hear us?
Yes, nice to see you. Excuse me.
There you are. Thank you so much for joining us. And I know you're a very humble person, so but I have to introduce you as who you really are. And Denis Hayes is a global rock star, grassroots leader who launched the First Earth Day in 1970, over 50 years ago, and he's expanded it year after year to more than 180 nations around the globe, making Earth Day the largest civic day of collective action on our planet. At age 80, he has devoted his entire life to raising public awareness in support of sustainability and environmentalism. He has inspired literally millions of people around the globe to take action in support of our planet, educated them on how to change their practices in support of clean air, water, and land. His bold, out-of-the-box thinking and doing helped launch the environmental framework critical to our country, including the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, to name just a few. He has worked to promote clean energy like solar power. He set the gold standard for green building practices. I read that he even installed composting toilets in a downtown skyscraper and was CEO of the Bullet Foundation. That's incredible. That's out of the box thinking, right? He's one of the most important and influential Americans of our time. And guess what? He grew up right here in the small town of Camas, Washington. His experiences growing up instilled a lifelong love of nature, and yet he grew up in the shadow of the paper mill when it was emitting these smelly gases and discharging chemicals into our river, and he experienced the impact of industrialization on people and our planet. In '64, he graduated from Clark Community College in Vancouver, Washington. He got his undergraduate degree in history from Stanford, where he was president of the student body. And he spent significant time backpacking. He keeps thinking, going out of the box. He goes an incredible, in the box and doing these incredible things. And then he does things that are really like backpacking around the world, right? So I think this is hopefully inspirational to young people to think about walking your own path. And he graduated, he enrolled in the Harvard Kennedy School of Harvard University. The senator talked him into dropping out, and he did eventually graduate from Stanford Law School. And here he is with us tonight. He's been a huge supporter of our small town efforts. He's an inspiration to all of us. It's too kind of him to show up and be with us tonight. Let us have a round of applause for hometown hero, Denis Hayes.
So, big question, Molly, is can we end this right here? Because I've got nowhere to go but down after that introduction.
Well, you're going to be in for a treat tonight because we have some wonderful representatives from our youth, from our schools that are here tonight. And they have worked together. They're going to introduce themselves to you, and they've got some questions. We'll start out with that, and then we're going to open it to the room. So thank you again so much for being here. I'm going to introduce Sophie Johnson. She is the president of the Camas Green Team, and she's done incredible things with developing scientific things like looking at the diesel emissions of the bus as they're idling and the impact on the student bodies. This girl is a rock star. So she's going to be attending the University of Washington in the fall. She's a senior here, so I'll turn it over to her.
Thank you so much. So good evening, everyone, and Mr. Hayes. So as you said, I'm the president of the Camas Green Team, and I've been doing some work with studying air quality at the Camas High School, as well as doing things like plant sales and stuff to raise more awareness about the importance of sustainable agriculture and kind of knowing how to grow your own food. So my first question for you tonight, Mr. Hayes, is I know that after the first Earth Day event, the Earth Day Network was established, and that has since expanded to over 180 countries. And now Earth Day is actually the most widely celebrated secular holiday in the world. So I was just wondering, what's it like to see an initially American event expand so much and to coordinate an event on that kind of scale?
That gets us into what could be potentially kind of politically awkward discussion. At the time that we did it, the Great Expansion was in 1990, coming out of the Reagan-Bush era, and America was not setting standards as a global leader on environmental issues, and there was some degree of reluctance on the part of many countries to sign up for something that, as you say, originated in the United States. And to be really politically awkward, it would be probably impossible to do today, given where the current administration's attitudes are toward everything from climate change to toxics to what have you. forestry to ocean issues. What we did, and remember, this is at a time when there were no computers, there were no iPhones, there was no internet, there was no World Wide Web, there's no email. The way that we organized that first International Earth Day was by bringing in graduate students from other countries who were attending Stanford, Berkeley, San Jose State, Santa Clara University, other San Francisco State, other universities in the Bay Area, and had them call their friends back home to talk about this as a chance to address global issues in an international framework. And from the start, we called it Earth Day, but for the first several years, it was really the United States Environment Day. But by the time you got around to 1990, climate change had become an issue. A series of threats to the world's issues and fisheries had become an issue. Migratory endangered species had become an issue, all of which could not be solved by any country acting alone. So the graduate students reached out to their friends back home, got them to agree to organize something, turn them over to our international organizers, and we built that network. But it was all done with telephones and breathtakingly slow and expensive.
Okay. So my next question is, I know you've done really significant work with solar energy, especially as the head of the Solar Energy Research Institute. So I was wondering what specifically got you interested in solar energy and why you decided to approach activism from that angle.
Oh my. There are a lot of easy answers to that. It's an enormously attractive source. It doesn't produce any radioactive waste, doesn't produce any bomb-grade materials, doesn't produce any greenhouse gases. It lies there in the sunshine and generates power, and does it now very inexpensively, now that we've reached economies of scale and economies of mass production. What actually first got me into it was a purely intellectual exercise. Molly mentioned that I went hitchhiking around the world for 3 years, actually. And one night in the middle of the Namib Desert, I decided that the ideology that would appeal to me most was one that did not then exist. And it was a recognition that humans are animals, and that all the animals on Earth are linked by certain principles of ecology, and they applied to everything from, mosquitoes, dragonflies, to elephants and hippopotamuses. And I began to wonder what would happen if we tried to organize human society with overlays that deal with a variety of moral issues and things that don't much apply in nature, but fundamentally tried to think of how you would organize what we would now call industrial ecology, urban ecology, ecological economics, none of which existed back then. And the currency of life on Earth is energy. And basically everything on Earth other than human beings and a few small bacteria at geothermal vents in the middle of the ocean get their energy directly and indirectly from the sun. It's captured through photosynthesis, put into energy-intense bonds, and then liberated with something called oxidative phosphorylation. I saw solar energy as something that fit in nicely to that worldview, that would let us behave much as the rest of life did. And their energy system doesn't produce a lot of long-range problems, and ours was producing spectacularly huge problems, and hence it had that appeal.
That's a really incredible perspective. Thank you. So I have one more question, and it kind of goes off of that thing about sustainable energy. So I read a bit online about your overseeing of the building of the Bullitt Center in Seattle, which is estimated to be the most energy efficient building in the world. Could you talk a bit about some of the processes that were used to make it so energy efficient and how that might be applicable on a larger scale?
Sure. I mean, an awful lot of it is stuff that everybody can do. We insulated the dickens out of it. We made sure that there wasn't air infiltration, except in places where it went through air-to-air heat exchangers, and we could control it and make sure that we were capturing the energy as it was exiting the building in the winter and entering the building in the summer. And we used efficient technologies, heat pumps instead of other kinds of ways to heat and cool the building. But the things that are unusual is that, well, for example, we have windows that operate sort of with their own frame of mind. The windows are integrated with outside Venetian blinds. Everybody puts their Venetian blinds on the inside of their windows, but the sun has already come through the glass. It's at that point been converted from short wavelength radiation into long wavelength that will not pass back through the glass. So it can come in, but it can't get out. It's basically the greenhouse effect. So if you put the Venetian blinds on the outside of the window, that stops it from coming in. We wanted to have windows that would open to ventilate the building when it ought to be ventilated to maintain the ideal temperature. But how do you open a window like an office building window if you've got Venetian blinds on the outside? And it turns out that the answer can be to have a window that simply pops out 6 inches, and that interestingly allows hot air from inside the building to go out the top of the window and cooler air from the outside to be sucked in from the bottom. So it's hooked up to a computer. It's all trying to optimize what the temperature is that we want to have in the building. And the windows open automatically. The Venetian blinds come down or go up automatically. When they come down, if the sunlight is bright, and we've got an instrument to determine that, and it would bother people trying to see computer screens, the Venetian blinds automatically tilt a little bit and reflect that sunlight up into the roof, where it can, at the ceiling, where it can bounce back further into the building. That was probably the most innovative thing we did in the energy efficiency realm, but it was spectacularly important. A huge amount of the energy use in buildings, I mean, by huge, I'm talking 3/4, is in heating, cooling, and lighting. And it turns out that we get most of our heating, cooling, and lighting from our windows and the external Venetian blinds attached to them.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over now to some representatives from, yeah, sure. I'm going to turn it over now to some representatives from Odyssey Middle School who are also going to ask you some questions.
Hi, I'm Audrey Merritt from Odyssey Middle School. This is Boris and this is Kyla. We are here to tell you more about how we help the environment with our projects.
So when we were 6th graders, we did a project where we integrated the native world into our campus, and we visited the Steigerwald Nature Reserve to find inspiration and brought ideas from there back to our campus. And my group, as an example, we decided to make an animal habitat where we chose a plot of land next to the underbrush, and we planted native berries, bushes, and trees to support the local fauna.
This year, as 7th graders, we just finished our native plant sale where we sold over 650 plants to our community members. We ended up making about $2,500 from that, and we decided to donate half of that to Columbia River Keepers. They went like a lot better than we expected.
We have a few questions to ask you. My first question is, how did your education inspire your love for Earth?
That's a really interesting question. The love for Earth, I think, preceded formal education. When I was your age, there were no environmental education classes. There was no such thing as really an appreciation of the environment as a topic. I mean, people worried about air pollution, they worried about endangered species, they worried about threats to the oceans, but nothing tied all of that together when I was growing up. But what I did have growing up was the ability to walk through some of the most magnificent forests on Earth, to ride my bicycle down through the Columbia River Gorge and see this spectacular scenery, an ability to see the impact that the mill was having on the immediate environment in Camas. It was putting out sulfur dioxide and hydrogen sulfide both of which, if it rains, turn into acids, and it does, as you know, rain occasionally in Camas. And so these things are coming down and hitting the roofs of automobiles, causing some people to begin to ask, well, if it's doing that to my car, what's it doing to me? The answer with regard to the automobiles was that instead of reducing the pollution, they put a shower at the end of the parking lot so that all of this stuff would accumulate on your car. And then when you left the mill, they hose it off. They didn't come up with any answers at all for the people. And all of that came together and sort of made me think, not too profoundly, that it must be possible to make paper without destroying the planet. And that was, I guess, a big part of my youthful motivation.
We have two more questions.
I'm wondering how you've seen nature and canvas of the world change throughout your lifetime.
I'm sorry, that didn't come through to me too clearly. Could you say it again?
How have you seen nature and canvas of the world change throughout your lifetime?
Uh, the There are a great many places where there have been significant improvements. It's difficult in an environment like today where a great many, particularly young people, look at what's going on in Washington, D.C. and what's going on in some other world capitals, and it's possible to be very depressed and among other things, to think that you can't really do much about all of that. But a huge change is what's going on right now in Camas. It's that people are taking control of their own environments, their own lives. They're eating more healthily. They're planting and growing their own organic vegetables. They're trying to rise up and take control of what will happen in the current mill site as it evolves and becomes the future of the city, because this huge property on the waterfront and down in the heart of the city is going to be fabulously important to Camas. And that's going to be determined, I think, by active people who become involved in the issue. If you look at the big broad scene, when I got into the solar business during the Carter administration, um, to just put it roughly in perspective, the cost of solar modules would be approximately $100 a watt. Today, the price of solar modules is approximately 8 cents a watt. I mean, just a stunning kind of change as a result of public policies. Tragically, not so much here, but mostly in Germany and especially China. That just gives us all kinds of options that we didn't have when I was growing up. And I think in a great many ways now, from electric automobiles to wind power to huge changes that have been coming in battery technologies, you're going to have an opportunity as you grow up to have a much sounder, healthier, more resilient, more sustainable system than we had when I was growing up.
What are some things like us young people could do to help the earth?
Well, it sort of sounds to me like you're doing them. One, the initial young woman who spoke about, who's apparently monitoring diesel emissions from school buses. And that's really important data. And you can then, and there's a wealth of scientific data about what effect those emissions have upon human lungs. The next step beyond that is to replace diesel buses and to replace them with something that doesn't have any kind of emissions at all. We now have electric school buses that are available. The Biden administration had allocated a huge amount of money to help schools like Camas buy battery-powered school buses. I fear that much of that is now going to be left on Camas's shoulders. But as you replace buses, I mean, a large number of big cities decided to replace their diesel buses and replace them with compressed natural gas. Or it is certainly an improvement in terms of air pollution, but it continues to produce greenhouse gases and continues to have other deleterious effects on the environment. Make that full leap, and that's something that students can do. I mean, there's nothing that's more impressive than a student group that gets out, does some hard-nosed research, comes in with facts and figures, not wavy, emotional, you ought to do this because it's the right thing to do, but rather just lay it out in a series of logical arguments to a school board. And they find that time after time enormously persuasive. So do things in your own lives. Try to make the changes that you can, but also try to change the institutions that are around you. Don't wait till you grow up. Learn, and you're also going to fail on some of these things, and that's a huge part of the process as well. It's a learning opportunity, but get out there and try. The final thing, and I'm going on at too much length here, is but something that very few young people appreciate when they are young is that your parents really want to think of themselves as heroes to you. They want you to think well of them. And if you can weigh in on a little bit what you're serving for food in your home, what kind of automobile your parents have, what kind of insulation levels you have in your house, whether if you have to replace a furnace or a hot water heater, that you replace it with something that's super efficient, like a heat pump. I've noticed that so far, all of the people who've spoken are young women. One of the most powerful bonds in the universe is the daddy-daughter bond. Uh, Appeal to your father, and he is almost certainly going to have a soft core and want to do what you think is right.
Thank you. Yeah. That's from personal experience because you have a daughter, correct?
I do, yes.
And
a
she is
granddaughter.
doing incredible things. She is walking your steps, and certainly she's doing incredible things in her own right as an environmentalist, which is really incredible. So you've heard from high school, you've heard from middle school, and we now have a third grader from Prune Hill Elementary, Ramsey Page, who's going to come ask you a few questions that the fifth graders brainstormed, and I asked him, he's my neighbor. He is so great. This guy, when he is in fifth grade, he's going to run the show. He's only in third grade, but he lives next door to the school field. And when he comes home, every time I'm out there working, he throws in and helps me. And as I'm working, he tells me all kinds of facts that I didn't even know. So he's already a scientist. And so the fifth graders brainstormed questions for you, but none of the parents would take them tonight. I don't see any of my fifth graders here. So they really wanted some questions asked, and they came up with some really good ones for you. So I said, hey, Ramsey, would you want to ask the questions? And he said, I'm going to start researching right now. So here he is.
So, not only was it an incorrect depiction, I'm actually a fourth grader.
Oh, good. I get you next year.
But here's the thing, I have 3 questions to ask. What was your craziest experience in Camas?
My craziest experience in Camas. You know, my craziest experience in Camas was something illegal, and I think I probably shouldn't talk about it with a group of young people. But well, I expressed before I agreed to do this that I was terrified that you were going to come up with a question that stumped me. I think you've done it. I will ponder it while you get to your next couple of questions and see if I can think of something that is worth relating.
Well, he's thinking you can ask your next one. You stumped it. Good for you.
Well, my second question is, what traditions do you have on Earth Day?
What traditions? I'm sorry, what?
Do you have on Earth Day?
Well, until I got to be old and became more aware of my carbon footprint, I had a fairly long tradition of going to some place where they were having something very exciting, either here in the United States or someplace else on Earth. And I had this tradition every year of not experiencing Earth Day at home, which is where we all ought to do it, but to go to the place that was doing something that was biggest and most exciting. the tradition now has been increasingly, I live in Santa Barbara, California, which has every year a really good Earth Day. And I get involved in my local issues and get involved with my local groups and celebrate it here.
So my third question is, why did you name it Earth Day specifically? Were there other ideas?
Um, Yes. Do you like the name Earth Day?
Totally. I mean,
That,
it's actually dangerous for the Earth.
that's why we named it. It was the name that we almost liked. Senator Nelson had initially envisioned this event as something that took place on college campuses and would involve teach-ins, very much like they had about the war in Vietnam, where people would come up and debate issues on stages, and there'd be an audience, and everyone would learn from that debate. Um, it turned out that the greatest interest in the event was not coming from college people at all, especially in the early months. It was coming from communities, an awful lot of it from young married women with small children. And the name environmental teaching just wasn't resonating. And so we started thinking about a whole bunch of other names. We considered Ecology Day, Environment Day, E-Day, Green Day, Earth Day. And very much like you, when you said you liked it a lot, you liked it totally. We all decided we liked Earth Day the best. It turns out that when we, 20 years later, went international, it was a wise choice because the name Earth Day seems to translate fairly transparently into every language on Earth. And so it's when people in Yugoslavia or people in Japan or people in India decide to go with Earth Day and they talk about it in their various languages, everybody understands what this event is about. Finally, in terms of wackiness, I suppose as wacky as anything, and this too was a little bit illegal, but I think the statute of limitation is long since I was in my senior year, one of our football games was against the town of Woodland, and a group of us went up to Woodland in advance of the game, stole their mascot, brought it here in town, did despicable things to their mascot, and then course of ridicule at the football game. That was, I guess, passes the wackiness test.
You know what, Ramsey? He won the science fair in town. So yeah, he's a fellow, even at your age. Weren't you, Dennis? You were a scientist as young as third grade. You were interested in science.
Yeah.
Molly, you were building me into something that is far greater than I am. I did do well in a science fair, but I was a senior in high school at the time that I won. A few more years, Ramsey.
Do you have any other questions for him? Or were those the ones? Thank you for being, I told him 3, you did perfect, you did 3. But do you have any other questions you want to ask him?
Well, I actually have my own questions. These are not from fifth graders.
Okay.
So,
That's the tough one.
how big of an investment do you have in things like solar energy?
Pretty big. I've even when I lived in Seattle, we got 100% of our electricity from solar panels on the roof. And at the Bullitt Center, we actually it's a 6-story building, and it is sufficiently efficient that the amount of energy that we generate from solar panels is about 30% more than the energy that is used inside the building itself. It's an all-electric building, so everything that we use is electricity, and we get it all from the solar panels, and sell that extra 30% to the local utility. And also, I should say, I have converted to heat pumps for heating and cooling my house, heat pumps for heating my hot water, pretty efficient light bulbs, everything that I can think of that I can do that makes the world a somewhat better place. That's fairly important, and it's a good thing about all of the students here who are doing things with their gardens and their transportation and the kinds of clothes they use and everything else. If you are going to be trying to convince other people to share some values with you or to do some things that you think make sense, it's very important that you'd be doing those things yourself. If people think that you are a hypocrite or that you're saying, do what I say, not what I do, that makes you enormously ineffective as an organizer. People will see through that phoniness and won't pay much attention to what you're asking of them.
Great work. Well, Ramsey's the real deal, so.
I have a few more. So,
Ramsey, what, last one?
so this is my fifth and final question. How do you feel that virtually everyone around the planet is investing in this kind of thing? Well, not everyone, but all the environmentalists out there.
It's a slow process. We have many trillions of dollars of investments in existing homes and offices and factories and cars and planes and everything else. And things are not going to change overnight. But I'm gratified to see that an awful lot of what's happening at the margin, the people who are buying something new, are replacing what they had with something that is significantly better. And it's easy to get impatient when you see how rapidly, the polar ice caps are melting, or how rapidly we're seeing the spread of hurricanes and wildfires. But there's just no way to change everything overnight. But we need to be doing it just as rapidly as we can. And that means that every time you make the decision to buy something new, make sure that it's the right thing.
He could keep you all day because I know when I'm out doing my field, he has a million questions and I love that about you. You are so curious and you're such an incredible leader already at fourth grade, sorry about that. You forgive me? Yes. So Dennis, I wanted to thank you. I wanted to give the kids the opportunity first and foremost. I know, in your 80th year, that's the oak year. And you have planted so many acorns here. And so, looking forward to see what these kids are going to be doing when they're your age, and living into your legacy by celebrating our roots is really what we're all about. But we do have a number of people who are older than fourth grade and are here who did come to ask you some questions. So I want to open it up to the room to come on up here. And if you have a question for Dennis, okay, or I guess, I don't know, can you see me? I think it's some sort of technology that I can Oprah this and it still will work. Let's see.
Did you ever struggle with any sort of stage fright, given how globally explosive this sort of movement was?
Yeah, I don't think anything that I would characterize as stage fright. My most profound emotions have always been amazement, and gratification, and the sense that, wow, that turned out so much better than we'd hoped. Molly, in her introduction, mentioned something about 50 blocks of Fifth Avenue in New York. That's about 2.5 miles of people lined up. So if you could climb up to the third story and look out over it as a sea of people, it would be like looking at the ocean. You couldn't see the end, even from an elevated stage. And we knew that we had something big with Earth Day. It spread not just as other movements that planned rallies. I mean, they were typically in one city or in maybe a half a dozen cities. We had something that was in literally every city, every village, every crossroads in America. And that's like 20,000 different places. And there were like something over 100,000 K-12 schools. I think the majority of them took part in it. It was this kind of astonishment that in chemistry, if you have a supersaturated solution and you drop a small crystal into it, the whole thing just precipitates down. That's what happened with Earth Day. We'd had the right issue at the right time when people were ready for it, and it would be lovely to think of myself as that esteemed character that Molly described, but I just had the great good fortune to be in the right place at the right time when something like that could take place.
Thank you. He says that he did drop out of Harvard Kennedy School in order to go do that. That's out of the box. And I love that. And I want kids to know that because I think that's important as they're blazing their trail and, that they can do things like that and make a big difference. Hi.
Hi, Dennis. Thank you very much for making a big change in my life personally. I am, I think, the only 1970 Camas graduate here. And Camas introduced us to Earth Day on the very first Earth Day. And I thought it was such a wonderful idea. And when I became a store owner in Vancouver, I adopted 3 miles of Highway 500 for 2.5 years.
Wow.
And myself and my wife were the only ones who picked up the trash. For 2.5 years, 3 miles of the highway. That's not the only things we've done. I want to thank you very much for bringing Earth Day to us. And I have a policy question to ask you because I'm so proud of being a 1970 graduate from your high school. We would like permission to call Camas the birthplace of Earth Day. And we'd like your endorsement on that.
Well, Molly and her group are doing a great deal to brand Camas with Earth Day. I have to confess, I do not have the authority to this to the exclusion of all else. I'm living in Santa Barbara. They had a huge oil spill here in 1969, and that was a focus of something that led into Earth Day. They took the first photographs of the Earth from space in 1969, and a great many people think that that's what made Earth Day possible, the ability to view the Earth as a whole. We had Silent Spring, we had thermal inversions, we had rivers catching on fire in the Cuyahoga, we had the Great Lakes dying, all of which fed into Earth Day. And clearly all of the experiences that I had when I was at Camas was a huge part of why I was involved with it as well.
Thank you so much, Dennis.
Okay, other questions? I think everyone's a little starstruck. I know I am, so. Okay.
Hi, Dennis. I've lived here in Camas about 10 years and it's been fairly clean, but I've heard stories about how the pollution back when you were growing up here. Can you talk about what it was like and what changes you've seen over the years?
Well, sure. When I was growing up, there was no Clean Air Act. There was no Clean Water Act. So the mill, because it used the sulfide process, had as those gases that I mentioned earlier, primarily sulfur dioxide and hydrogen sulfide, went up unconstrained and turned into acid and precipitated down. And if you talk to somebody in, say, Portland and mentioned Camas, universally the response was, oh yeah, that's where the stink comes from. I mean, the whole region was known for the stink of this uncontrolled paper mill. And every now and then you'd go down to the Columbia River Slough and you'd see scores of dead fish, and maybe in some cases hundreds of dead fish just sort of floating there. And you'd go out into the forest and go hiking in the summer and maybe doing a little camping, sometimes just trying to get away from everybody for a while. And then these astonishingly wonderful old Douglas fir forests. And 2 years later, you go back there and it has all been clear cut. And it's just this catastrophic approach to cleaning out natural resources. not with selective harvesting, not with trying to do something that emulates the way that nature operates, but just going in and ripping everything out because you can do that a little bit more cheaply. Um, and so the context then was one where I was pretty highly motivated to try to get some kinds of regulations someplace that would do this. And I'll say that in terms of this is not a personal accomplishment. There were a huge number of things that were involved with this, including the presidential aspirations of a senator named Ed Muskie. But right after Earth Day, we had, for a variety of reasons, a Dirty Dozen campaign to try to take out several of the worst members of Congress. And we successfully defeated 7 of 12 incumbents. It is really, really hard to beat an incumbent member of Congress. And we managed to take out 7 of 12 that we'd, and it was clear that we were the margin of victory in each of those cases. And one of them was a guy named George Fallon, a name that I'm sure means nothing to anyone in the room. But at that time, George Fallon was the chairman of the House Public Works Committee. So if you wanted to have a federal building, you wanted to have, I don't know, prison, a courthouse, a dam, any kind of a public works in your district anywhere across the country, you had to have the permission of the guy who chaired that committee, George Fallon. When we took out George Fallon, clearly with an environmental campaign, that absolutely transformed the House of Representatives. And 1 month after that election, Muskie brought up the Clean Air Act, and the Clean Air Act passed the Senate on a voice vote, passed the House of Representatives 434 to 1. There was one member of both houses of the American Congress that voted against the Clean Air Act, something that would have been inconceivable in 1969 became unstoppable in 1970. And those are the kinds of magic moments that can happen in a democracy where everything just like a school of fish, it's going this direction, and then suddenly it flips off and goes that direction. And it was my thrill to have been part of a handful of those occasions when we've done things.
That's beautiful. I really appreciate you being here. And I think that on that note, I promised you not more than 30 minutes, and I really want to be respectful of your time. And I think that's what it is. I mean, sort of the last question is, how do we keep hope alive? How are you keeping hope alive? I'm microdosing reality and doing local activity. What are you? Sounds like you're doing something similar, but we're in a state where, as an activist, I did marriage equality, nothing on your scale, but we would sort of wait for the wave, right? Because if you don't have a ton of money, you kind of have to wait for the right moment where you can write it and then you'll get free media because everybody acts together as one. So, they're studying how the starlings do the murmurizations and how the school of fish know how to turn like that. And they say that what they do is they look at the 7 birds around them. There are just 7 birds around them, and they've got very sensitive, tuned in senses to that. And if all 7 begin to do that and they're all sensing each other, I think that school of fish moment, do you think we still can get that school of fish moment together? Are you waiting for it? And what can we do? Is there anything you can think of other than local actions, which we are doing, to help be ready for that moment, that murmurization where we all kind of turn towards our environment and fly out of the Icarus situation that we're in now?
Yeah, it's quite a set of metaphors you managed to pull up there, Bob. I would agree with everything, but I would change one of your words. It's not a matter of waiting for that time. What you need to be doing is working, building, failing often, trying something that doesn't much work. But in my case, showing up for these various rallies that are being held by a variety of organizations. The Earth Day Network has been part of those rallies, as the Sierra Club and some other environmental groups. And it's not having any effect. It's growing up. They said nationally, the thing that was last weekend was 3 million people. That doesn't make much difference. But you're doing that you're not waiting for anything. You're trying this, you're trying it and trying it in the belief that the moment will come when success is possible and you will have the necessary momentum, the necessary networks, contacts, skills, and proficiencies to be able to take advantage of it. If you wait for that to come along, you'll just be buffeted by it. But if you continue to work and get prepared for it, then when the opportunity comes, you can score.
Well, you are the model of persistence and it's truly an inspiration for us and so many people around the globe. We're so grateful for you joining us. We're so proud to be from the hometown where you hail from. And we're going to do everything in our power. We'll invite you to come when they're taking those 25 buildings down and we're revisioning what could be. We've talked to the superintendent about a trade school. We've talked to people about the green space. There's so many new ideas, and these kids in the front row here are going to be leading the charge of what's to come. So we would invite you to come back with those buildings down and see the new perspective on Camas. We'll build some bullet foundation buildings, so those green buildings that you talked about, right? Ramsey, we're going to do it? And you're going to come up with some new technology too, I know you will. So anyway, I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. I really want to thank you for your time, Dennis. We're so grateful, and we will keep on keeping on in your name and live on in your oak year to plant more acorns around. And thank you for all you've done.
Thank you very much, Molly.